Hi, Gábor.
Hi, Benu.
Welcome, everyone, on our weekly podcast on Databricks release notes. Today, we have a lot of interesting topics, including Genie Code, super important topic. We will talk about Databricks 1 on the account level. We will talk about lake-based auto-scaling, including high availability, some new funny resources for Databricks apps, and a bit more. So what are your topics, Gábor?
Well, I have brought multi-table transactions are now in public preview, so you can try them out. I also thought interesting the declarative feature engineering updates to the API, and also the Databricks SQL pipeline support notifications and now support performance mode as well, which is in beta.
Pretty cool. So let's dig in. So what I wanted to start with is Genie Code, because apparently it gained a lot of interest in the news. So what is actually Genie Code? The release note itself said that Databricks Assistant is now Genie Code, but actually what this blog post talks about is much more. So it talks about, Genie and gives a nice example in this YouTube video, and it talks the whole agentic authoring experience. So I think to understand what Genie Code actually is practically the rebranding of Databricks Assistant, and it has and practically it's the coding assistant of the workspace. So, but why is it called Genie? And I think this is an important thing to discuss, because it has some connection to Genie. So far, Databricks Assistant had features like there was the data science agent, the data engineering agent, dashboard authoring agents. So these are actually built-in agents to develop code. But one thing is common with Genie, because what was Genie? Genie is the interface where you interact with your data with natural language. But if you think about it, Genie Code also requires, so these authoring agents, they also require access to your data. So that's why I think it makes sense to call it Genie. Let's have a review once again on what is Genie versus Genie Code. So once again, Genie is practically the spaces where you interact with your data. For example, here I imported some data, and now I can ask questions. So what are the delays? And it will look for the data that I attach to this Genie space and will probably give me some answers.
Hopefully some correct answers.
Yeah, hopefully some correct answers, because it knows the data and it knows that data that I attach to this Genie space, right? If I would like to access Genie Code, what I need to do is to go into the workspace, open the Assistant, which is now Genie Code. Okay, and surprisingly has a very nice new icon, which is I like it a lot. I think it reflects.
I also like the new logo, by the way. Yeah, I like it a lot as well.
So practically, I'm in a notebook. I open the Assistant, and it's pretty much how the integrated agentic IDEs are working. So here I can type, give me a prediction about the flight delays, and I will let the agent start working on it. And so actually it also does some search on the table. So it does, at the beginning, it does the same with what Genie or a classic Genie did previously. So it understands the data, gets some answers, but it does something else. Here it will start analyzing the data and will come up with probably some code that is being developed. Okay, so I think the difference between Genie and Genie space is super important.
Yeah, but I think you also sort of seen how easy it is to mistake these two. I think we've seen in the past that Databricks, some of the names that we love, some of the names that we tolerate, I think this might has a chance to become something on the tolerate side, right? Because now it's a little bit harder to distinguish. When I say Genie, do I mean the coding agents, which can also work with our data, or do I mean the spaces, right? So it's like, explaining what a SQL warehouse is. It doesn't store data, but you can still interact with the data, right? So I think it's a great rename and great new logo, but it definitely has, we'll have to see in the trainings, right?
I will give you the reason why Genie Code, the naming of Genie Code still makes sense. So there's been another announcement about the acquisition of Quotient AI, which is a company to do automated evaluation and enhancement of models. And practically, I believe this will enhance the entire working of how Genie is working and Genie Code is working. So I think this adds to the picture, because the work that Genie Spaces are using are practically the same as Genie Code does. So it will need access to the data, need a complex workflow, and build something.
Yeah, but I also think, when we talk about Genie, we oftentimes highlight how it only uses your metadata. So, if you're still worried about Databricks, training with Quotient on your data, that's still not going to be true, not in Genie Code, nor is it going to be true in normal Genie Spaces as well. So that's still the case. But I think, that's a great move.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is, of course, building on top of the partner-powered AI features that you can turn off, but that it is practically an enterprise level AI integration. Yeah. So it is using the latest models. Actually wrote some code for us for the prediction model. So it was a full agentic workflow, including where you can specify if it will need to ask me to execute the code or just or execute it on standalone. So we still have some control, of course, over what we want to do.
A few more years till Skynet. Yeah.
That's something very cool, I think, and there is and we will see how that is evolving. But we actually had all those features already available, but now they are better aligned, and I believe they will improve a lot in the coming months. And is already doing pretty well. So I would not start developing manual code. I will already start with asking an agent to develop some code for me. And there's one nice thing to add to the whole Genie topic. There was another note on account level Databricks 1. So what is account level Databricks 1? So Databricks 1 is an alternative UI to access the BI facing parts of Databricks, as we discussed, like the dashboards, the Genie Spaces, or Databricks apps. And now it has a way to access Genie Spaces from multiple workspaces at the same time. So that is account level Databricks 1, which is something that you just simply enable, and I think it's now enabled by default. So it's pretty cool.
Yeah, it is, absolutely. I think, Databricks did a 2-for-1. If you are a data engineer, now you get better, or at least a nicer logo, but you still get access to your assistant, which you use probably daily. If you're a business user, the results of that assisted or now Genie Code assisted workloads can be seen all in one place on the account level Databricks 1. So I think that's definitely an improvement on both sides.
So what did you bring today, Gábor?
Well, I'm really, really happy to see multi-table transactions, which are now in public preview. Now, I think this is definitely one of those things where on the many, many trainings that I've done, I always had to explain that, whenever you were working with Spark or you were working with Delta in Databricks Unity Catalog, you were always targeting one table. And you couldn't really target multiple tables, really, not easily, not without a lot of, boilerplate code to manage that on your end. But now we have atomic SQL transactions, atomic and transaction statements that you can execute in SQL. There are, of course, requirements for this. So all tables, all targets must be Unity Catalog managed tables. I think we are not surprised at this point that, managed tables are getting the new features. I would be surprised if external tables would get the new features. They must have catalog managed commits enabled, which is a feature that they have. By the way, both Delta and Iceberg are going to be supported, but I think Iceberg is right now just beta and not public preview, so might be less features there. New runtimes, SQL warehouses are a must, so 18.0 runtime if you're running clusters, and SQL warehouses, serverless compute are required. So for all of these transactions. I think this is a great way to sort of bring people from the classic database world into Databricks, and still let them have very, very atomic and assured ACID transactions, but targeting multiple tables and coming from potentially multiple different sources as well, with the transaction snippets, as you can see.
Yeah, that makes sense. So how would that change your typical SQL writing code, or how does that change your practice in Databricks?
Well, for example, the example that you see, we can do 2 updates and 1 insert in a single transaction. That means that you have more control over what gets put into your tables. You can also target multiple different tables. So if you're doing some data modeling, because, for example, you're using star schema, you're using data marts, oftentimes in Databricks, there was a limitation that if you want to update your dimensional tables, if you want to update your transaction tables together, you couldn't really do it. With this, you can actually have more options and more freedom when it comes to actually creating a data mart, a star schema, or a snowflake schema. So I think that's a great support decision, and I'm really interested to see, when this becomes not public preview or GA, how will this work and how much will it change existing Databricks workloads.
Cool. Thank you very much. That sounds great. I have another interesting topic for you today, which is lake-based autoscaling. We have talked about lake-based autoscaling last week. Now it includes high availability. So practically what high availability offers is that it has now fallback options. So what does high availability mean? It means that you have multiple instances of the same resource across availability zones. So if one availability zone is not working, it can fall back to a secondary availability zone. And so this is something cool. And again, moving lake-based forward into being a full enterprise-ready OLTP database. So just one small thing, but it enables a lot of things.
So to reflect on that, I think, this is a must, but it's great to see how we talked about this last week as well. We talked about lake-based autoscaling last week, and now we have a new news to share with you about lake-based autoscaling. So it definitely showcases how much effort Databricks is putting into this. I think this is really great. So I have something else a little bit different for all the feature engineers, machine learning engineers out there. So now the feature engineering API, which you might have used before, you might not have. Basically, it enables a little bit seamless communication across your Delta tables and across your models. Now it has a declarative API as well. Meaning, basically, very simply put, of course, there is a lot to discuss here, is that you can create Delta table sources and you can materialize different sources directly into managed tables. Once again, as you can see, managed tables getting all the attention. That means that with a little bit of Python, you can actually, as you can see, for example, in the quick start, create full features directly from tables, and all of that integration, all of that, how to get the data into a feature and how to use that features is getting more seamless with the support of the declarative APIs that we can actually see and interact with, for example, in Lakeflow. Also, we have a bunch of different functions that you can apply to these sources. So, for example, if you want to average certain values in your source, you can do that. If you want to apply some, you can also do that as well. You can actually see a list down there. You can see these basic functions which can make your life a little bit easy, shorten your code a little bit.
Does that really mean practically they're bringing the features of declarative pipelines into a feature engineering workflow?
I think they are going in that direction. Once again, this is beta, so we'll have to see how much of this works out. As you might not know, whenever something is in beta, it is entirely up to us, the users of Databricks, to basically decide if this truly becomes part of Databricks. So if you find this interesting, if you want to use this, if you think that using the best bits of declarative pipelines in your feature engineering is already something that you do, check this API out. And with usage comes GA-ness.
Thank you. That's super interesting. There's one more nice new feature that was released this week, which is some new resources for Databricks Ops. But what are actually new resources for Databricks Ops? So as you know, for Databricks Ops, you need to define what it can use from the workspace. So what are these resources, like a SQL warehouse, like the tables you're using, like a machine learning model endpoint, or whatever. And now there's a new resource. Actually, you can use another Databricks app as a resource for a Databricks app. So this is, again, just making it more useful. And it's a cool feature.
I think we can all collectively hear the people who loved microservice architectures in the 2010s just suddenly waking from their graves and realizing that we can once again have 50 different apps deployed and serviced, but now on Databricks.
What the difference is today that probably some agents are deployed in these apps, so they can use other agents deployed in different Databricks apps, just to align to today's needs.
So just to close things out, we have one more thing. Once again, this is a beta feature, but now Databricks SQL pipelines support trigger on updates, and they also support performance mode. So what this means is actually two features built into one, announced at once, is that whenever you create a new streaming table or materialized view completely in SQL, through your SQL editor, for example, using a SQL warehouse, now you not only can define a schedule for it, but you can also do a trigger on update, meaning that you can define an upstream table, and when that table is updated, your materialized view or streaming table automatically updates. I think this is great. It's a must-have.
So it's practically bringing the same feature that existed for jobs into the materialized user streaming tables in SQL.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Something that works out well can be applied in multiple spaces in Databricks.
Absolutely. And you also bring up jobs, similarly to how jobs and Lakeflow Declarative Pipelines can have performance mode in serverless. Now the same applies to your materialized views and streaming tables. So as you've just said, similarly to jobs and to Lakeflow Declarative Pipelines, the same rules now apply to this. So I think that's also simplifying things a little bit and being more cost effective.
All right. So you can just simply choose between performance versus cost optimized version.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well done. Thank you very much, Gábor, for your updates. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening or tuning in. We will come with the updates next week. And thank you for listening, and have a nice week.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.